begin our stabilization triangle, we selected conservation transport as our first wedge. This wedge is part of the transportation sector, and we chose it because it seemed practical. If we can get enough people to feel inspired, reducing miles traveled by vehicle is not a stretch. The cost is not an issue because we would only spend on advertisement for our plan. With enough support for the idea, achieving the goal of cutting miles traveled by all passenger vehicles in half would not be impossible. Unfortunately, we are up against increasing public transport, and many may argue that this type of transport is a necessity.
Our next wedge is CCS, or Carbon Capture and Storage, which is part of the heating and direct fuel use group, as well as the transportation sector. The sole purpose of this wedge is to capture and store the CO2 that is emitted during synfuels production, which is from coal. To achieve this, we would have to use CCS at 180 synfuels plants. The cost of this is higher and the process is more drastic than our previous wedge, but we believe that this could be extremely effective. We chose this because we know it is somewhat of a stretch, which is what Earth needs right now. This is a wake-up call to those who deny global warming's existence. Sadly, emissions will still only break even with the help of gasoline.
Our next wedge is fuel switching electricity, which is a factor of the electricity production sector. This process switches coal-burning electric plants for natural gas plants. We chose this because the cost is low, and this would heavily reduce fossil fuels. The benefit of this wedge would be the reduction of pollutants from electric plants. Unfortunately, natural gas is non-renewable and not always available.
The next wedge we picked is nuclear electricity, which falls under the electricity production faction. Our main goal would be to replace coal-burning electric plants for nuclear plants. We chose this because the price was not too high, and electricity is such a driving force all over the world. Because of its importance, this change would be so effective. But of course, with this, there are some hazardous drawbacks. Communities will oppose this process, and there would be nuclear waste. While some may assume this change will cause weapons proliferation, the risk of accidents in nuclear power plants is low and declining. The consequences of an accident or terrorist attack are minimal compared with the other commonly accepted risks.
Our next wedge is wind electricity, which is once again found under the electricity production sector. We chose this because wind, a renewable resource, would take the place of coal-based electricity. This could cut the amount of emissions by so much in just a short amount of time. Also, with this process comes very few consequences, and it seems many would favor the idea. The only setback would be not in my backyard, which is opposition by residents to a proposal for a new development because it is close to them.
The next wedge we chose is solar electricity, also found under the electricity production group. We chose this because solar electricity has already been introduced years ago and is becoming quite common among the world. In this design, solar PV would take the place of coal-made electricity. The only drawbacks would be the lack of PV cell materials and the cost of the operation.
Our next wedge is forest storage, which is in the biostorage sector. Our goal would be to store carbon in new forests, which could potentially keep the dangerous emissions from running throughout the rest of the earth. For this wedge, cost is not an issue, but we would compete in land use with those who reside near the land for their jobs or even those who live there. Also, too much biodiversity can have a negative effect because every type of wildlife has certain habitat needs that may be difficult to tend to.
Our last wedge is soil storage, which is also part of the biostorage sector. We wish to use farming techniques to store carbon in soil. We chose this because it would be effective and out of the way from much human activity. Cost is not an issue for this process, but the carbon may not stay in storage if the land becomes deep plowed. You can go.
Along with our ideas comes stakeholder groups that have different opinions on our stabilization triangle. Taxpayers and consumers may not like our information because their taxes would most likely rise due to new development. Energy companies such as solar and wind companies would definitely benefit from our options, but coal-based energy companies would not. Environmental groups would love our ideas because we are trying to shape our corroded world into a more environmentally fit one. Manufacturers that produce environmentally sound products will enjoy our plan, whereas others may not. Industrialized country governments will most likely dislike our plan because we are stepping away from a very industrialized planet. Lastly, developing country governments may possibly prefer our ideas, especially if price is not a huge issue.